You're listening to the Reinvest Podcast, where each Tuesday we will show you how to reclaim, reconnect, and refocus your life by bringing you the top real estate professionals in the industry. We'll pull back the curtain so you can implement these tools and tactics to build generational wealth. Your hosts, Garrett Gatton and Seth Ciminillo. Awesome. Thank you guys for joining us again for another episode of the Reinvest Podcast. Excited today to jump in and kind of put our nerd lens on here, and you'll kind of see how that plays into our topic for today. But no, thank you for joining on. This has been an awesome journey for us over the last, almost 2 years, actually, of doing this podcast, which is, I feel like we've hit we've crested the hill. So we've beat the odds. For anybody out there that was rooting for failure, you can take it.
I think most podcasts actually don't make it past like episode 3. I think that's like a statistic where, they don't even make it that far. It's like they get excited enough to start it. They come out with a couple episodes, and then they realize that only 5 people watch, and they probably lose steam and just stop.
So we beat the odds a while ago. Well, that's good. So today we are going to bring on our guest, Dan Barrett. Dan, how are you, man?
I am doing so well. Excited to be here. Congrats on beating the odds.
Yeah.
It is true that everybody's first podcast episode is like a 2.5-hour rambling conversation with their friend that nobody cares about. And if you can get past 3 of those, you're probably gold. So.
We look back, quite literally, there's some early episodes on our channel that we were just like, do you think anybody would notice if we deleted those? Like
and they just disappeared.
If it was like episode 3, 4, 8, 9, 10, just kind of. But
look,
you know
look, Stalin figured this out a long time ago. You just erase the history books and be like, I was awesome this whole time.
Yeah, right.
Any different.
We don't know.
Actually saw a thing recently where somebody was talking about podcasting, and they showed like the first episode of the Lex Friedman podcast, first episode of Huberman Lab, and they're all over the place and very messy, and audio's bad. And so, yeah, it's if you can get past that hump, it's all downhill from there for sure.
Do you have a podcast?
I do have a podcast. I got a podcast called the REI Marketing Nerds podcast. I am also several years in, I don't know, 200 episodes or something. I've been doing it for a long time, but
nice.
It's fun, man. I love the medium. Like I love this, right? I love this medium. I think it's super fun. You get to talk to awesome. It's the best part of it for me is I have investors on and I learn stuff nonstop, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm just constantly taking away a thing that I can apply to my life. So it's super fun.
It's selfishly, I mean, I don't want anybody to know this, so hopefully our guests aren't listening to this, but it's an excuse for me to meet some really awesome people, and that's kind of what you're saying is to get, a concentrated amount of time with somebody who does something better than you or in an industry that you aspire to be in. Yeah. And so that brain trust and that wealth of sharing is really neat. So, but this is a great segue kind of into what it is that you do and why you're on our show today. So give us a little context to who is Dan the Man. And if you want to talk about, your dad role and the Legos behind you as well, just give us kind of the essence of who you are and how you get into real estate.
Yes, I am. I would say my official title is head nerd. I'm going to change it to head dad or maybe nerd dad or something like that. But I run a company called Adwerd Nerds. We are a marketing agency. We focus entirely on real estate investors. So we've been doing online lead generation for motivated seller leads for, I think I was saying before we hit record, I think I'm on year 13 of doing this.
Wow.
So quite a while. And we do, Google ads, Facebook ads, do some SEO, we do Microsoft ads, all that kind of stuff. Really any way you can get leads and deals online. And also get, I got kids. You were mentioning I got a bunch of Lego stuff behind me that I could not bear to see destroyed on my basement floor. I have, the name the AdWords Nerds is like, it's kind of funny, but I have been a nerd about this stuff forever, right? Like I started using the internet back when it was, you had to know someone's phone number and dial up your modem into their specific computer. And I was doing that to play, text-based role-playing games with like weirdos. And it's just been constant from there, right? It's like the interest keeps, my interests evolve, the channels evolve, what's happening evolves. but it's always fascinating to me, and I'm very lucky to get to do what I do. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
It's pretty incredible. One of the things that you had kind of specified in what it is that you do and the scope of what Adwerd Nerds does is that you manage over $5 million a year in client ad spending.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money that people are putting into these marketing channels.
Yeah, it's that's one of the stats that always kind of blows me away. Yes, it's a lot of money, man. It's been interesting. I always say you can plot on a chart the cost to generate a click for a real estate investor in Google, right? We call that the cost per click, the average cost per click, right? And you can plot that over time, like a time series, plot the price like you would stock price or whatever. And it's basically a diagonal and up to the right line since I've started, right? The channel's become so much more competitive, so much more sophisticated, so much more going on. But I always point out that like if the price of gas had increased at the same rate that the cost per click for investors has increased, we would have had riots and, a million years ago, right? It would have been, we'd be living in, Mad Max territory. It would be very different. So it's been a challenging industry. It's a challenging industry in a lot of ways, a lot of moving parts. But the thing I always really like about it is, and this is where I get philosophical about it, but Google Ads, like many things, right? It's a microcosm of everything you're ever going to want to know about how the universe works, right? It's market driven. So if you understand how things are market driven, you understand human psychology and decision making. You have to understand complexity. You got to get into complex systems theory. You get into statistics. Like I spent last year deep diving into statistical process control and just being like, oh, I could use this here. I could use this here. Like it just is for someone who's curious and likes to learn, which is really what I like to do. There's a never ending series of things to dive down the rabbit hole on. And that's kind of what I like about it.
So real quick, sorry, this is super random. Just because this is a video, you look like Tom Hardy.
Yeah, I get that all the time. Oh man, Tom Hardy comparisons. Yeah. Every time I take off my shirt, people are like,
Tom Hardy, Bane, is that you? Yeah, that's hilarious. So sorry, that was super random. But
no, but by the way, I'm gonna clip this and send it to my wife later and be like, by the way, just so you know.
Yeah, just so you know how lucky you are.
Home a dozen roses and so I think a lot of people, to get us back on track here, a lot of people don't understand what you just said right there. Like we take the internet for granted so much and it's at our fingertips, for somebody who's younger, right? So if you're kind of a millennial even, I think when I was in high school, like a freshman, the first iPhone came out, right? So we've just we were this transitional generation of having access to technology, information, data, and but it was really a generation before us that kind of built the systems that we rely on daily. Yeah. And everything that goes into that. So how did you get into, like, of all the PPC and kind of marketing and stuff, you could be generating leads for any kind of industry through this medium. Why real estate?
Yeah, I specifically ended up in investing because, so I knew I wanted to work for myself, right? At the time I was in school to be a teacher. I wanted to be a history teacher. And I was working in public schools, doing my student teaching, all that stuff. I have a master's in education and in history. And was kind of going down that route. And I started freelancing on the side, doing some basic kind of web design, online marketing stuff. Because again, it was just a skill set I developed as a hobby over time. Right. So I was freelancing and make ends meet because teachers don't get paid a lot of money, particularly if you're not a full-time teacher yet, right? You're not getting paid, whatever it is. And so when I started freelancing, started going pretty well. I was just doing local business, right? So I was doing pizza shops. I did like an ambulance company, like all sorts of random stuff. And I knew like I wanted to focus, right? Because I think part of my personality is I don't just want to do a thing. I want to build something original in whatever I'm doing, right? I've been that way since I was a kid, right? Like I'm a musician. When I took maybe like 3 guitar lessons when I was in middle school, and I was like, I'm out. I know enough to like write my own stuff. And that's all I ever wanted to do. Right.
Oh,
Same
wow.
thing here. It's like, I wanted to do something new. And I know, like, I think I'm pretty self-aware. Like, I'm not, my IQ isn't that high, right? I can't just like brute force it and be like, well, nuclear physics is where I'll make my mark. It's not going to happen. So like, I wanted to focus in somewhere on a manageable field of knowledge that I could master, right? I could get good enough to like build on top of it. And so I wanted to focus. I didn't know what my niche was going to be. I tried different things for a different while, like a couple of while. Like I tried naturopathic doctors for a while until I realized like they felt so guilty about taking money that they actually didn't like marketing. So I was like, all right, that's not going to work. And I was like, I know I have to make this decision. I didn't know what to do. So I was like, okay, I need a forcing function, right? Somebody who's got to force me to make the decision. So I signed up to go to a Tony Robbins Business Mastery seminar.
Okay. Yeah.
I'd never done a Tony Robbins thing before. I didn't know much about Tony Robbins other than like he made people dance. And it was like more money than I'd ever spent on anything in my entire life.
Oh, yeah.
Right. I was like, I put it on a credit card. I was like sweating the whole time. This was a big reach for me, but I was like, I'm so invested in it. My one thing I'm going to get out of this is I'm going to pick a niche.
Yeah.
And, that's the forcing function. So I went and I was like, I know he makes people dance. I don't want to dance. I was like, it's not my thing. So I was like, I'm going to sit all the way in the back. So I sat all the way in like the furthest most row. Because I was like, the chances of Tony Robbins somehow picking me out of the crowd is going to be very low. So I sat all the way in the back, ended up sitting next to this wonderful couple who I still know today, Glenn and Amber Schwarm, really incredible real estate investors and coaches, and sat next to them. And I'm telling them the whole story about the $10,000 in the forcing function, the picking the niche. And they were like, well, you should work with investors because we always need leads. And I was like, done. Great. Right. Like, that's my thing. And then I was like, okay, so I've made this decision. Now, what is a real estate investor? Like I didn't know anything about it. It was really just moving on from there. I still remembered Dan Schwartz, who went on to start the company Investor Fuse, was now sold to On Carrot, but he was my first ever client, right? He was a young investor in Baltimore. He was the first person I was really running ads for. And I just started to get a feel for it, and then I started to reach out to investors and say, hey, I'm focusing on investing. And at the time, which is kind of hard to imagine now because there's a lot of people who work with investors, there wasn't anybody doing that. I think there was one real estate investor who actually talked about Google Ads publicly, and was Sean Terry, who's obviously still doing his thing today very successfully, but no one was bothering to ask what a motivated seller was. Everybody, when you hired an agency to do ads for your investing business, you just got a generalist agency that didn't really know what was going on. And I was very lucky that, at the time I didn't have any competition. The investing space was moving online in a very big way. So it was very much like right place, right time.
Yeah.
The right strategy. And it's been, just kind of a roller coaster ride ever since, to be honest. I was a teacher, right? I have never thought of myself as a business person. I've thought of myself as a student and a teacher. And over time, it's just been this process of constantly trying to read the data, figure out what's going on, make up something that you think might work, test it, and run that cycle for 13 years. And here we are. So it's been it was a weird journey, but a really fun one, and one I'm very grateful for.
I think what's interesting about you describing that is it seems very normal in a way. I'm not to downplay that, but most people don't know what they want to do, and it's not a linear progression to get to where they are. And so, it started with the uncertainty of like, well, I want to work for myself and become an entrepreneur. So I'm going to bet on myself. I'm going to go to this Tony Robbins thing. You didn't know what was going to come out of that. You took the step to do it, and then ended up meeting an awesome couple that kind of spoke into and maybe steered you into the direction that you're now in. But then you kept taking incremental steps into that, seeing if it would take you further. And it did. And you had some assumptions, and you tested those assumptions, and they were right. And so I feel like that is business. That's a great summary of how successful entrepreneurs function. Is it's not this like Dan had the vision of, and he knew that this market was an untapped market of $400 million. And if he could capture 10% of that market share, he'd be a rich man. Like, it wasn't that. But you had the fundamentals down and you did it. What's interesting about real estate investors is it's a lead generation that has a big outcome for them financially, potentially. And so they're willing to put money behind getting those leads. So who your clients are, they're motivated, right? You're finding motivated sellers, but you have motivated clients because the payout could be a big deal. So let's get into, somebody who's listening to this. They're like, wow, fascinating. Pay-per-click. I thought it was oversaturated. You know, how do you actually build a business off of that?
And maybe even explaining for someone who really does not have a knowledge at all, what is pay-per-click? What are Google AdWords even?
Yeah, so that's a good place to start. So I will say the terms pay-per-click and Google Ads are often used interchangeably. They are slightly different, right? So pay-per-click is just any advertising channel where you only pay when someone clicks on your ad, right? So Facebook ads are PPC, Bing ads are PPC, right? Google ads are PPC. Over time, what's kind of happened is I've noticed, particularly investors, they'll say, I'm doing PPC. What they mean is Google ads, right? So there's a bit of a like linguistic shift happening there, which irks me if I'm going to be totally honest. But Google ads obviously is one particular channel that uses this mechanism of pay-per-click, right?
Gotcha.
And Google ads really just refers to anything that is an advertising, placement run by Google. So for example, YouTube ads are Google ads because Google owns YouTube, right? If you see like an image ad on some blog that you're reading, most of the time those are AdSense ads, which is part of the Google Ads platform, right? Sometimes called Google Display Network. If you see an ad in your Gmail, that's a Google ad, right? So there's a lot of stuff that's Google ads, Android application advertising and so on. But when most people, what they think of when they say Google ads and what most investors are doing to generate motivated seller leads are search ads, which are the classic, I think like the classical example, like you go to Google, you type in like, how do I sell my house? And then the first result that you see is an ad for someone that's saying, looking at to sell your house, I'll buy it. Click here. And then you click on that thing. That person is charged a certain amount of money, and that person is sent to your website. That's the basic mechanisms of how Google ads have worked forever. Now, under the hood, there's been a lot of transition, a lot of change over the past 3 to 5 years. It's a very different channel, very different sort of mechanism than it used to be. But the basic underlying structure is the same, right? Someone goes on Google, types something in, see an ad, they click it, you pay. If they don't click it, you don't, right? And the benefit of Google ads, particularly to the investor, is the difference between inbound and outbound marketing, right? Like outbound marketing is, I'm sitting at home, I'm just hanging out, and you knock on my door or send me a postcard or you call me and you say, hey, do you want to sell my house, right? And Seth Godin, who's a very popular kind of marketing author, very famously called this interruptive marketing, which is like they're doing something else. And you're like, hey, can I buy your house? And it's like, there's a certain vibe to it.
Unwelcomed,
Yeah, people don't tend to love. Now, I will say, there is a massive place for outbound marketing. There's a reason that direct mail has worked for investors for decades and decades. Like, I'm not saying all that stuff is bad by any means. It's just, that's the dynamic, right? You're interrupting someone, right? They're walking by on the street and you're saying, excuse me, sir, and you're handing them a flyer, right? That's what it is. Now, inbound marketing is the opposite. It's they, the seller, are seeking out information about a problem or some kind of solution to the problem, and then you get in front of them. Right. So they're coming into you. So for example, in Google, classic kind of theoretical example we'd always use, if someone goes into Google and they type in like, sell my house, they are now looking for, you can assume, some kind of solution to selling their house. And if you approach them in that moment, They're much more open. They tend to be further down the funnel, which really just means they're closer to making a decision on what they want to do, how they want to do it, when they want to do it, et cetera. And so the benefit that Google has always had is that people go on Google to solve problems and answer questions. So if I go on Google and I'm like, hey, how do I sell my house? If you're able to put an ad in front of that person in that moment, then you're just going to get a higher quality of lead overall, right? Not always, not in every case, right? Doesn't mean, it'll work for you, but generally that's the strength of the channel. So that's why, it's actually a little strange to me. It took investors, I always say like investing as an industry is typically about 5 years behind the curve technologically. I think it has actually changed now when you look at the sort of uptake on AI tools and stuff like that. It's a little faster than I would have anticipated. But generally, as an industry, we kind of lag behind the curve. And just took investors a while to realize that channel was there. And so we were a little bit lagging to get in there, but that's the benefit of doing it in the basic way that it works.
That's a great explanation. And I just kind of want to maybe overlay the business application here. So an investor comes to somebody, marketing, firm like yourself, says, hey, I like to buy real estate investments. Let's call them single family houses in these markets. We flip them. If we don't flip them, maybe we'll wholesale them to another investor. Sure. Any way we can kind of make a profit on that. But our goal is to generate leads. And here's kind of our strategy, right? You have the direct to seller mailers and, door knocking, driving for dollars, and PPC then is kind of the digital landscape to, have that footprint and like you said, to use your words, inbound marketing.
Yeah. I think it was about 2 years ago that the majority of real estate deals were initiated, meaning the process got started online rather than offline, right? That was the sort of tipping point. And so, the idea is to get in front of that person as early as possible. Sorry, I feel like I cut you off. Go ahead.
No. And so we kind of see it from an interesting perspective. We've had wholesale companies from California call us on houses in our market asking us to list that house because the seller went online
and found them
and solicited that, and they were using this methodology and got in front of them. But yet they were in our market, where realistically we should have probably heard about it or seen it. But because of where that seller went, we're now getting it out. So we've kind of been downline to see that process take place.
Yeah.
So when investors come to you, do they have to have like a website in place already? Is that where they're driving traffic? What's the strategy of like what words, what market, and then how do you capture that lead and where does it go?
Okay, it's an interesting question. Okay, so in terms of keywords, which is how you target in Google Ads, right? So you say like, what searches do you target, right? That's probably one of the areas where the most technological change has occurred over the last 4 years, right? Used to be the whole game was about picking the right keywords, this keyword, not that keyword, right? It's sell my house fast, but not sell my house quick. And it was like, you have huge spreadsheets, thousands of stuff in them. That's not really the case anymore. Keywords are still important, but I would say like, no one's inventing a new way to say, sell your house, right? Like, I don't know if like Gen Z is walking around saying like, I'm going to rizz up your house this week or whatever. Well, this not thing is happening, right? The person that needs to sell tomorrow and the person that's just kicking the tires, they both type in sell my house the vast majority of the time, right? So not to say that it isn't important. There is like science to it, but I would say like, don't obsess about it. Like you just get in there and see what happens. In terms of the market, really depends on where you want to do deals, right? Like generally as a rule of thumb, you can think that the larger the market in terms of like the more people you're getting in front of, the lower your cost per lead is going to be, right? Because you can think of it as, okay, you almost think of this as like, let's use a metaphor, like you want to go out and get a date. Okay. How likely are you to go out and get a date? Okay. Well, I'm going to go to one bar in my town and just hit on everyone I can hit on, and hopefully I get a date. And that's going to get, maybe you have a 10% chance of getting a date doing that, right? If you look like Tom Hardy, like me, maybe it's higher, but whatever. If you then say, okay, I'm not going to go to one bar, I'm going to go to every bar in the state. your chance of getting a date is going to go up, right? Same process is at play in Google. The bigger the market area, the lower your cost per lead is going to be. Essentially, the easier it's going to be for you to get a lead because you're just getting in front of way more people, right? But the rub there is just because you can get a lead really cheap by advertising in like, Death Skull, North Dakota or whatever, where nobody is, doesn't mean you want a deal there. Right. So I always say, like, market selection is not an ads question. It's an investing question. It's a question you got to answer in terms of like, where do you want to most do deals? Right. And then in sense of like where you send them, you need a website to send traffic to. Now, when people work with us at Adwerd Nerds, we build landing pages for you, right? Like we'll build you out a page. We'll put all your stuff in it. We basically build you a new website, mostly because in the process of managing these accounts, we will end up testing different variations of the page, right? We'll test this headline versus that headline, this color versus that color, whatever. And we usually don't want to mess up your regular website doing that, right? Like you have a website already up that's your primary brand website, and you got all your information on there. We don't want to be like changing your button color every 14 days or something, right? Over in our own little landing page. We'll build that for you. Outside of that, you don't really need much of anything. What I think is important is you have a website that works to convert people, right? So it's got to have a prominent form, prominent phone number, make it easy to contact you.
Right.
So you don't want to make them jump through too many hoops. At the same time, don't make it too easy, because if you're just like push this button and that's all you got to do, you're going to get a lot of activity, but it doesn't mean you're going to get more deals, right? You want to have a little bit of friction, but not too much. And then the critical element after that is follow-up. Like the thing that people forget is that when you are getting in front of a lead online, chances are that other people are also trying to do that. Right. And so speed to lead, which is what we call like the speed with which you're able to follow up with a lead when they come in, really critical. Can you put them into some kind of automated follow-up sequence where I always say it doesn't have to be complicated. Email everyone on your list once a month and say, hey, you ready to sell your house yet? Signed, whoever. That's all you got to do. But some kind of automated follow-up, some kind of speed to lead process where you're going to try to touch base with people. Because they're going to have massive impacts on how many deals you close and what your return on your investment is. But other than that, I mean, I feel like actually people overcomplicate things. They want like the craziest widget or this new thing, or AI chatbots are a big deal right now. And that's all cool, right? It's all cool. But ultimately, really what it boils down to is, did you manage your account well? Did you follow up quickly? And are you good with people when you finally get them? And if you can do that, pretty much anybody can make money doing this. Right? Doesn't mean you're going to do 1 million deals a day, but you could do a few deals a year with a very modest budget just by crossing your T's, dotting your I's, and doing best practice.
What would be like a modest budget for a beginning investor? What would be?
That's a good question.
How easy? What's the barrier to entry for an investor? Hey, I'm just kind of starting out, got a few deals under my belt. I'm doing wholesaling and flipping. What do you typically see?
So the kind of quick answer to that is you can make it work on any budget. You just have to adjust your expectations, right? Let's say your average cost per deal acquisition, you won't really know this getting into it, but let's say average cost per deal acquisition is $3,000 a deal in your market, whatever it is, right? Whatever. I'm going to pay $3,000. I'm going to get out a deal out of that. Maybe I'm going to make 10 to 20. I'm happy with that. Okay. So if your budget is $100 a month, you'd be like, how long is it going to take me to spend $3,000, right? And then I should put a deal under contract, right? I mean, it doesn't exactly work out that way. We're talking about averages and probability, right? You could do a deal on day one. Who knows, right? But generally, you can kind of think of it like that. You want to adjust your expectations. I will say for us, right, when we have clients come in and start with us, we're typically looking for people to have a minimum budget between like $2,000 and $3,000 a month, right? So about $66 a day or so. Because we found that like it's not that below that can't work, because you can arrange a strategy around any budget. You really can, right? It's not that it can't work. It's that if let's say you got $1,000 a month to spend on ads, I'm like, that's cool, but don't pay me whatever money you have. You know what I mean? Like do it yourself. until you can get it to a point where there's enough budget and enough work to justify hiring a manager. Right. It's not so much like it will work or won't work. It's just like, well, this is why I do coaching, right? I do a lot of coaching for people who are training in-house staff to do Google Ads or want to learn to do it themselves. Like nothing I do is secret, right? I mean, there's not like some secret math formula I invented that like allows me to like hack Google, like all that stuff's nonsense.
Dan, give us the algorithm. We know you're
Yeah,
holding out.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I found this secret way. I found this one person was like, oh, I found this amazing way to like boost my website and get thousands of links to my website a month. And I was like, oh, it's sick. What's that? And he was like, he made the script to like basically create Google Calendar events that he then like put the location as his website. And he was like, look what I'm doing. And I was like, dude, this doesn't do anything. It's just so stupid, right? It's like the dumbest thing. It doesn't work. But it's like, there's a lot of stuff out there like that.
Just has 1,000 Google Calendar events.
Exactly. That's what it was. It's like, yeah, I can invite you to them. I was like, no, I don't want you to, the thing is like, there's no real secret sauce. What there is analysis of reality, like looking at data, knowing how to read data in a way that makes you or helps you to make better decisions, and then consistently making those decisions over time. That's all the game is. And so you can make that work at any budget. What I would say is if you want a manager, you're thinking probably $2,000 to $3,000 a month in ad spend in order to justify the expense of labor, right? But beyond that, I always say like, we have a rule that I teach in my coaching program. It's called Barrett's rule, because everything's named after me because I'm a narcissist, right? So Barrett's rule is your budget when you start off is what you can afford to lose for 6 months in a row. So like write down all your numbers, and wherever you start to feel sick at the idea of losing, you're like, okay, that's where you stop. Because the challenge is not so much the budget. The challenge is everyone comes in with the same idea. They're like, well, I'll put it all in, and then when I make money, I'll put more in, right? But the challenge is making money is a process of learning. It's a process of learning what's going on in your market, learning what your competition is like, learning where the opportunities are. And you need time to do that. Not money, you need time. So I'd rather you spend 6 months in there learning at a lower budget than go in like all in on, I'm gonna bet it all on black. And then you're either dead or alive at the end of that.
But what a wild ride it was,
Yes, exactly. So and it's very romantic, and everybody says the same thing. They're like, well, when I make money, I'll put more in. I'm like, that's the wrong way to think about it, because it's, it's like Russian roulette. The goal is not to win. It's just not to lose.
Right.
Lose. You know what I mean?
Have you read 80/20 Sales and Marketing?
Perry Marshall?
Yeah.
Yeah, Perry Marshall's great. Yeah, he's a really fascinating dude. I actually met him in person, which was really cool. I think I put a picture of it on my Instagram. Nice. Because he was one of my old school marketing faves. It's like Perry Marshall, Dan Kennedy, this kind of like raft of dudes and dudettes that kind of came up, or at least I got into around the same time.
Yeah.
Really smart dude, yeah.
Everything you're saying, I just read that book like a month ago, and it's kind of all coming back to me. And he talks a lot about split testing with Google AdWords. He was a big advocate of Google AdWords. And so, I mean, I'm sure you guys use some form of split testing. Is that what you mean when you're saying you're switching off the headers, switching the colors, you're just seeing what performs better?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, everything is always a process of testing your hypothesis against the reality, right? And so there are different tools you can use in order to do that, right? Split testing is one. Split testing is where you have two variations. Could be two different landing pages, two different buttons, two different bidding strategies, two different keyword sets, whatever. It could be anything. And you run some percentage of your traffic to one and some percent of your traffic to the other, and you see which does better over the same time period, right? So the classic is 50% of my traffic sees website A, 50% of my traffic sees website B. Which one does better over time, right? And so that's one type of test. It's not the only type of test. You could do an ABA test, which is, okay, we had website A, we run it for a certain amount of time. Then we just switch it. Now 100% of our traffic goes to website B, and then we switch it back to website A, and then you see what the conversion rate does over those time periods, see if there's a correlation to higher rates for one or the other, right? So you can even do, there's types of testing that don't even really formalize the testing process. So for example, I'm a huge believer in process behavior charts, which are a process management tool, primarily came about in the manufacturing industry when you had like W. Edwards Deming and these people who were really working to kind of modernize American manufacturing. And that gives you a way of measuring the performance of any system over time and understanding whether a change up or down is likely to be random chance or not. So you could literally just, okay, I had one website, I'm going to change it, and I'm going to watch that process behavior chart, watch my metric over the course of the next 6 weeks, and see if I get a statistically significant change, right? It's not so much the structure of the test that matters. It's much more of a mindset than anything else, right? It's understanding that the world we are living in, whether it's markets or your personal relationship or just what happens to you throughout the day, that world is incredibly complex. And as human beings, we are narrative creating animals. That's what we do, right? Like we see random stuff and we're like, here's the story of what made all the random stuff. Right. And you do that always, always, always. You cannot turn it off, right? Yeah. And you'd be wrong, right? It's why you can literally create superstitions in chickens in a laboratory by feeding them at random times. And the chickens will literally start to, who knows what the chickens think, but you can sort of theorize, right? That what they think is like, oh, I was scratching the dirt this way, and then the food came. And then I happened to be scratching the dirt that way again, and the food came again. And they will start scratching the dirt that way every single time, trying to make the food come, even though it's totally random. Like we all fall victim to this, right? It's a thing that always happens. So it's more of a mindset of like understanding how our brains work and then understanding the way you're going to try to analyze the world in order to drive better decision-making over time. But yes, split testing is a great one. It's a classic online marketing tool and fun to do. Very interesting. I will say the one of the things I'm most grateful for being in this industry for this long is I have really, truly learned the lesson that I am wrong the majority of the time. Like whatever I predict, the majority of the time I'm wrong. It just is always the way it is, right?
Barrett's rule. I'm just kidding.
Barrett's rule, yeah. You got to have tools in place to help you make those decisions better over the time. Yeah.
Good. We're going to jump into our smaller pocket segment. So Dan, why don't you go ahead and give us your smaller pocket story. Tell us about something that went wrong within your business as you've been building this the last 13 years, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, man, my favorite story of this, I mean, I joked that I have more bad decisions than good decisions, but my favorite business failure to this date was the first time I really started to get involved in online business. I was in college and I read 4 Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss when it came out. And I was like, holy moly, like I want to work 4 hours a week. It's like, that's what I want. Still one of my favorite books. I love that book. But in that book, he was basically like, hey, use Google Ads to test business ideas, right? And I was like, that's a brilliant idea. I'm going to do that. Right. So I was looking around, like what business could I run? And so I had this brilliant idea. And I'll see your reaction to this idea, but I was like, I'm going to create a PDF guide, okay, for vegan bodybuilders. So it's a guide to vegan bodybuilding. Now, keep in mind, not a vegan, not a bodybuilder, right? But I was like, I'm sure I could figure it out. I was like, I'm sure I could put two and two together. So anyway, vegan bodybuilding. And I made a landing page that said, hey, get this PDF. It was like $50 or whatever. And I was like, I'm going to be printing money off this thing. I needed a name for it because I needed a domain. So I was like, all right, I got the domain. I don't think I have it anymore, but I had this domain for years. It was going to be called vegmuscle.com. And I set the whole thing up. I turned on the Google Ads and I was like, I'm going to see how many people download Veg Muscle PDF or whatever, which didn't even just broke if you click the button. But I was like, if enough people click the button, I'll make it. And I forgot about it. And I kid you not, it was 11 years later when I remembered I had set up this account and set up this. And I was like, I was like, has this thing been like charging my credit card for 11? So I'm like perspiring and I rush in and I couldn't remember how to log into it or like anything like that. Right. So finally get into it and realize 11 years, not a single person had clicked this ad. My very first Google Ads campaign.
So
I was like, it's
bad
going to be
idea.
a record for the worst marketing campaign of all time. But God, I love that so much. I probably wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Veg Muscle.
Veg Muscle. Oh man, that's really funny. That's a good story. So did you calculate how much money it had been charging your credit card over?
Well, I'll tell you, I know exactly how much. 0, because it's cost per click and no one had clicked. So it never even charged, right?
Wow.
So if it had been a big hit.
I was so bad at marketing that I saved myself potentially thousands of dollars, right? So, wow, man, and I'll say this, like, even by chance, you would have expected at least one person to click on.
Right.
So it had to literally have actively repelled people from clicking.
Yeah.
Like even if I was a vegan bodybuilder, I would have somehow come to Veg Muscle and been like, yes,
I feel like there can't be that many vegan bodybuilders though.
I think ironically now, I think it's probably a growth
more common.
Yeah. At the time, and I also think like Veg Muscle just does not sound good. It's like not, I do a bad job of naming my businesses. I admit this about myself. I mean, I accept it. My
maybe you should
company is called Adwerd Nerds. I get it.
Veganbodybuilder.com or something. I feel
that would have been, look, see, now hindsight, I also know that this was all terrible. But at the time, I was like, I'm a genius,
I wonder if you were just ahead of your time.
Oh, that's what I always say, man. Every time I totally screw up, I'm like, I'm just ahead of my time.
They don't get
I came up with the idea. I'll give you an example. $3 million idea. Anybody can take this idea. I was like, I'm going to start a restaurant, right? Local restaurant. You sell donuts and bagels. Okay. And it's called Whole Foods.
Oh, nice.
Whole, H-O.
Yeah. See, anyone can take it. But everyone says it's a terrible idea. And I just say I'm ahead of my time.
I think you get it. I think that would be good, especially with the logo. You just put like a donut or a bagel where the O's at.
But look, it's the same as just take off the W, and I'm pretty sure you'd be sued into oblivion, but it's fine. I'm sure you can fight that.
That was the most different, smaller pocket story we've ever had.
That was really good.
Is Veg Muscle still a domain? Can I go there?
I know. I think it must have expired a long time ago. I wish I had kept it though. That's like the equivalent of like it's like keeping your yearbook or something. I want to keep that to like remind me of how goofy I used to be. But no, I think it's lost to time. By all means, if you can go register it, do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's not there. Darn.
Man, that's hilarious. All right, well, we're going to transition into our little nugget. So, Dan, this is the part of our show where we kind of extract out, a business principle, a personal development principle that you operate by, a little nugget, maybe even a medium-sized nugget, depending on how foundational it is to your life, that you can give to our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that comes to mind, but to be honest, the thing that has stayed with me the longest and is the biggest part of my life is journaling. And I journal in a very particular way. I journal basically the entirety of Monday morning to lunchtime every single week. So same time every week. I call it a weekly review. And I really take time to, I'm very analytical, right? So I've got a spreadsheet with my weight and my heart rate variability and my, like how much I worked out. And, if I lift weights, it's like how much total tonnage and what was the perceived difference. I've got all these kind of stats, right? And it's very much actually having this conversation, very similar to the way that I think about Google Ads, right? I sit down with that data and you can extrapolate any amount of stories from the data, right? You can look at a random number generator, have it generate numbers over time, and you will be able to kind of stitch together a narrative. And so what I try to do instead, I've got all these stats. I've got these stats going back years now at this point. I try to look for what is an outlier. Right? Like, I try to really train myself. Weighing yourself is a great way to do this. If you weigh yourself every day, like every morning, same time every day, your weight's going to go up and down. Like it'll be up one day, down the next day, up one day, up, down the next day. And it's mostly random, right? Or it's you had a bigger meal than average last night. It's going to be gone by the afternoon or whatever, right? There's a lot of stuff happening. but you start to get an intuitive sense if you weigh yourself every single morning of when something is unexpected. Like there's a big part of your brain that's dedicated to pattern recognition. And it just starts to be like, that's weird, right? Like, I had a light dinner last night. I'm up today. That's weird. And what I try to do in my journaling practice is train myself on just my life, my regular kind of everyday stuff that I'm doing. Like, what actually demands an explanation? Like, what is a change that is significant enough in my life that I actually need to think about? And that has like two effects, right? It has two effects on you. One is you start to notice problems or issues or even like, positive changes very early. Start to feel like something feels off here. And you start to really be able to dial in on that. And then the flip side of that is you start to learn, man, the vast majority of stuff that happens to you, like your revenue goes up and down, your marriage is better or worse, your kid yelled at you, you feel bad, you feel good. The vast majority of it is just noise. It's just noise. It doesn't mean anything. It never meant anything. Like I used to be so wrapped up in like every tiny change and trying to fix it, and you end up overcorrecting the vast majority of the time. And so it's almost a practice of focusing on what matters, but also realizing that the majority of the stuff that happens in your life, your problems, the good things that happen to you, like they're not because of you. They're just because the world is a complex and random place. Lots of stuff happens. And if you just focus on the stuff that is real, that's a statistically significant change, that is different, that is interesting, you actually have way fewer things to worry about, right? There's way less going on than you think. It's just like, hey, my weight's up today, but am I going to change my diet? No, my weight's probably going to be down tomorrow, right? It just is like a load off my back. And for someone like me whose brain is like, man, if you let me chase, like I've got squirrel brain, right? Like I will chase all day, every day. It is just a practice of reorienting myself to the fact that most stuff is random, never had anything to do with you. That guy honked at you. This person was a jerk to you. Our wife was in a bed. Most of it never had anything to do with you. You could just let it go.
Yeah.
Focus on the few things that really matter. And so that's been my big one. I have that journaling practice of I sit down with a spreadsheet and I sit down and I type out and I get my thoughts on paper. Like, what do I think all this means? And it's been super valuable for me. Really, really valuable for me over time.
It's pretty incredible that you have a lot of that data then on your personal health and some of those habits that you have to be able to kind of, to your point, you almost needed a baseline to know when something was an outlier and when it was correlated to something. Otherwise, you're just kind of living in the noise and the chaos, and you don't have a baseline to make sense of something. So, that's great. So, okay, what's been one of the best resources in your business development?
Oh man, so there's a bunch. Obviously, I really want to shout out. I almost feel, that feeling where you want to gatekeep stuff because you feel like it's so good and you don't want other people to know about it, so you can seem smarter than you are. There is a blog out there. Shout out to Cedric Chin, who writes a blog that's called Common Cog, commoncog.com. I cannot recommend a blog more highly than I recommend Common Cog. Cedric Chin is straight up polymath, student of business.
Wow.
One of the deepest kind of readers of business literature. I originally learned about statistical process control from Common Cog. I read an article about process behavior charts and was like, I wonder if I can apply this to my business. And when I say that, like 80% of my time is spent just telling my team to put stuff in process behavior charts now, like I'm not exaggerating. Like I have gotten more wisdom from those blog posts than really any other business source in the last several years. And, you could go read it. There's a paid tier. I highly recommend you check out the paid tier, but the free stuff is incredible. Really fantastic resource. Wow. So Common Cog, really, really, really great.
Awesome. That's really practical. How can people find out about Adwerd Nerds, what you guys are doing as they're thinking about this episode and how this applies to their business?
Yeah, well, you could go to adwordsnerds.com. You can just Google us. You'll find us. That's where, I put all the podcast episodes.
How funny
up there.
if they couldn't find you on Google. That would be so
I
ironic.
mean, I always say, like, it's funny to Google our names. It's like, you can see our competitors bidding on our name. And I'm like, yeah, spend money. It's fine, But yeah.
What the ultimate power play when they're trying to, like, do a keyword.
It's all flattery to me. Or I'm like, I don't, I'm like, yeah, it's very flattering. I would say, like, there's an article that I wrote. People really want to get a sense of how I think about things. There's an article I wrote. I think it's called "The Ultimate Guide to PPC for Real Estate Investing." You just Google that, you'll find it. You go on adwordnerds.com. It's there. It is like a legit, like 45,000 word article. My goal was to
like
make
the PDF of Veg Muscle.
It's I wish Veg Muscle was that line. I'm not even close to that line. But I really aim to make that article better than most people's paid courses.
Wow.
I really dig into like every part of it, including things that I very rarely talk about outside my coaching program, like constraints-based management theory and all this stuff. It is, for me, like, I wanted to write it so that if you read it, you could launch Google Ads for motivated sellers tomorrow. And it's been the #1 ranked thing forever for that kind of search. You can go find it. I'm very proud of that. That'll give you kind of an insight into what we do. But
shoot, this thing is comprehensive. There's like 11 sections to it. Wow.
It's like a
it's
book.
long, man. It took me, I think, like 3 months to write.
Wow.
But it's good, still holds up, I think. And you can always jump on a call with our team. That's kind of what we do. We do strategy sessions with folks, basically talk about your market and like what we would do in that case. But yeah, man, we're not a huge agency. We're not trying to be the world's biggest agency. We want really long-lasting relationships with clients. So we don't work with everybody. It's got to be right for you and for us. But if people are curious, you should definitely read the article, hit us up, whatever makes the most sense for them.
Well, Dan, what I love about this episode today is it's very natural for you to share what you're excited about. And it's clear that this is a personal interest of yours, which is funny because you don't invest in real estate, but you have been very successful in helping others invest in real estate because of the service you provide, and you're very clear on what that is. So thank you for the conversation, the banter. Thank you for just the expertise on this, man. Well,
thank you for saying I look like Tom Hardy earlier. I wasn't lying. That really made my day. That was pretty sick.
Would you be offended if we just use his profile picture for the
No, in fact, I insist that like every now and then you cut back to a picture of Tom Hardy to confuse people. Hey, thank you so much for having me. This was great. You are great at this. This was a wonderful interview, and I really, truly appreciate it.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, blessings to you.
Yeah, cheers, man.
As always, excited that you joined us on another episode of the Reinvest Podcast. If this episode added to your tool belt or left you feeling inspired, go ahead and share it with a friend. Stay tuned every Tuesday for new episodes. And if you want to get in touch with us, go to our LinkedIn or Facebook profiles and shoot us a message. Move farther, reach higher, and grow deeper. See you next time.